I would like to tell you a story of two women. The first woman was a wealthy woman. She had a name that was respected. She came from a family that was respected. But alas, when she married, she lost her husband. So she became a widow. And then this woman of fame and fortune, she married again. But alas, she was divorced. And so she became a divorcee. And so she became eventually a single mother with children. But then she married. She married a man who was lower than her in wealth, lower than her in status, and he was younger than her. And when she married that man, her life became a life of trials. Because her husband was a man who became hated in the city of her birth. She was married to a man who was exiled from the city of her birth. A man who was no longer welcome in the city of her birth. And then she died, and she left her children, and she left her husband. Does anybody know who this woman was? Okay, Khadija, radiallahu anha. Stay with me. There's a second story of a second woman. This woman was born to a noble family, but again, that family lost its name and lost its power and lost its status, and she was married off as a young girl to a man who had no money. Not only was she married to a man who had no money and had no power and was hated and being fought and vilified by the people of her town, that woman never had children. She never had a son, she never had a daughter, and her husband died and left her a widow. Who am I speaking about? Aisha radiallahu anha, Abdullah. Now, isn't it interesting that when we think of Khadija and Aisha radiallahu anhuma, we don't think of them in that way, do we? Do we think of them as miskeen? Do we think of them as victims? Do we think of them really as widows and divorcees and single mothers, impoverished and oppressed? Do we? But were they not actually divorcees and widows? So this is the interesting thing. Every one of us has a life story. And you get to decide how you tell your life story. Will you be the victim or the victor? Will you be the victim or will you be the heroine of your life story? When we think of Khadija radiallahu anha, do we not think of her as a heroine? She had trials. She went through loss and pain and disappointment and sacrifice, and yet we still celebrate her as a hero. And we tell her story that way because she deserves to have her story told that way. Same with Aisha radiallahu anha. Did she not suffer trials? Did she not suffer, slander and being left a young widow and then everything else that happened afterwards? But do we remember her as a victim? We remember her strength. We remember her bravery. We remember her intelligence. We remember her feistiness. We remember her as a hero. But what I'm saying to you is this. This is not only for them. You can choose how you tell your life story too. Because every one of us is in one of three states when it comes to being tested. And I'm going to ask you by a show of hands, inshallah, this is a safe space. Don't ever, ever come with shame here. Because life is about tests. And so put your hand up if you've ever been tested in your life. Put your hand up if you've ever been tested. Okay, look around you. Okay, look around you. Okay. You are not alone. Thank you. Second question. Put your hand up if you are currently going through a test right now. Put your hand up. Okay. So we're not alone. The third state is that you will be tested. Unfortunately, we can't do a show of hands for that because we don't know the future. But those are the three states of man and womankind. You have either been tested, or you are being tested, or you are going to be tested. And so now, my message to you today is, now that we know that sunnatul hayah, the way of life, is that we will be tested, and that if we haven't been tested yet, it's coming. Now that we know that, why don't we empower ourselves to be the heroes of those tests? Retell your life story in your head right now, with you as the heroine, as the hero, as the victor, and not the victim. Whatever it was, a bad marriage, you lost a child, subhanallah, rahimullah, you lost your husband, you lost your mother, your father, you didn't complete your education, your children went off the rails. Whatever the test is, think about yourself in your story as the victor, as the hero, as the one who remained steadfast, the one who held on, the one who cried out to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the last third of the night, the one who prayed and cried and prostrated for the end to come, for the ease to come. Because if you did that, guess what? You are the winner. Does that make sense? If your trials purified you, if your trials made you humble, if your trials brought you closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if your trials reminded you that this life will end, if your trials reminded you that you will be returning to Allah and you need to get your affairs in order, if your trials taught you a lesson, that I will never allow that again, that I will never accept that again, that I am worth more than that. If your trials taught you that, any of those things, you are the victor and you are the heroine by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's grace. And so I invite you all to change the story you tell about the trials that you go through. Don't put yourself in victim mode. Don't put yourself in the role of the martyr. You are bigger than that. You are stronger than that. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would never bring you to something that you cannot handle. That will never give you lemons that you cannot make an amazing lemonade out of. And how do we know this? We know this because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala promised it. Which surah am I speaking about? Which ayah am I thinking about when I say that Allah knows what? Allah will never burden a soul never burden a soul more than it can bear. So you will be burdened, but not more than you can bear. And when you are burdened, which is the ayah to remember, inna ma'al usri فَإِنَّ مَعَ الْعُسْرِ, and we hold on to that, and it gives us strength, and it gives us hope. And so when the dawn comes, because it will come, you can look back at your story and say, Alhamdulillah, I was the victor. I emerged the heroine of my life story, just like the women before me, including Khadija and Aisha radiallahu anhum. And I pray that that serves you. I pray that it benefits you. I know it is something that has held me through everything. Remembering, I choose how to tell my life story. I choose which role I'm going to play, and you can too. May Allah bless you through the good and the bad of life and give you the khair fi dunya wa fil akhirah, and bless your families. Jazakum Allahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum.